But even when you're not in a full-time kollel or beis medrash, you still got to continue to grow. You got to steig. Aliyah in Torah is not an all or nothing. People make a mistake sometimes. I'm either like fully immersed or forget about it. That's a very, very big mistake. A person has to grow. So in whatever environment you're in, you can become a Talmid Chacham, you can finish Shas, you can know many, many sugyas. And if we have the opportunity to do it, that means we have the responsibility to do it. Anything we're able to do in Ruchnius, HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects us to do.
We're here at Yarchei Kallah learning with all businessmen and reconnecting to Ohr Samayach.
I always tell my kids, I say, your best friends are the ones that you spend time learning Torah together with.
A highlight for me was definitely seeing Rav Breitowitz, learning with Rav Breitowitz on the Yarchei Kallah. Someone I always saw in speeches and listened to his Q&A. He's always so clear in a special anav way. To see him in person and to hear from him was an incredible experience.
My name is Anthony Knopf. I live in Montreal. I'm the rabbi of Congregation Beth Orah. It's a tremendous privilege to hear shirim from such world-class Talmidei Chachamim, Rabbi Breitowitz, Rav Asher Weiss.
Hi, my name is Yelshima Kestemam. I'm from Monsey. I heard about the Yarchei Kallah program through Rav Breitowitz's shirim. I can say I come from a Hasidic background, Baruch Hashem, but I'm going home and I'm inspired to become a Bal Tshuva. The Navi says there will come days before Mashiach that people will be hungry and thirsty to hear the Dvar Hashem. And this is what we're seeing here in Ohr Samayach. Thank you so much.
This is the very first official Yarchei Kallah trip. I heard about it through the alumni email. I was very, very excited for Ohr Samayach to start such program. It is amazing.
It's just hard to believe it's the first time in my life that I'm in Ohr Samayach. There are very few Jews in the entire world, in the frum world, that didn't hear of Ohr Samayach. Maybe first, foremost, definitely one of the greatest centers of Kiruv L'Choikim in the entire world, and for decades. So for me, it's a zchus and a privilege to be here.
Where did that come from that a person would have to take care of their body, and also what would be how far would that go? Let's say a person who smokes, is there a problem of smoking because they're not having a person to their body, or let's say a sport that might be harming themselves or painful, something like that? Are there any good issues?
Yeah. So there are two separate halachic issues with what you might call harming yourself. The first is more of a question of wounds, like either cutting into yourself or tattoos and the like. And there are prohibitions against tattoos. There are prohibitions against cutting, most is to do. And there are prohibitions against chabur, against wounding yourself. The same way I can't wound you, I'm not allowed to be chayvel myself affirmatively. And as the Baal Tanya writes in the Shulchan Aruch HaRav, that your body is not your property. Your body belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, when you harm your body, you're harming something that doesn't belong to you, just like someone else. Now, that refers to doing things that cause physical harm. Now, when you're dealing with things like either diet, high-fat diet, or lack of exercise, so it's more difficult to fit that into, physically harming yourself, although it does affect your health. So there you come on to a different mitzvah, and there's a mitzvah called Ushmartem Ma'od L'Nafshoseichem, you shall guard your lives. Now, although the context of that pasuk is referring to remembering Matan Torah, that's what, but the Rambam learns that this is a general obligation to safeguard our health in terms of diet, in terms of exercise, and the like. Now, granted, we're not always as careful as we should be, but the Rambam, who of course was a great doctor, makes the point that a healthy body is one of the necessary conditions to serving Hashem in a proper way. And the Rambam makes the point, health itself is not an end in and of itself. The Rambam says, somebody who's addicted to health is just as bad as somebody who's addicted to gluttony. One is not intrinsically better than the other. The only thing is, health is a means by which you will be able to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's why it is important. So in reality, therefore, even though, we're I'm certainly not as careful, and many religious Jews are not as careful as we all ought to be. Taking care of your body is a very important thing, provided that you put it in the context of being strong, healthy, vibrant, and energetic in order to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the question then becomes, how far does that go? So, for example, playing contact sports, playing football, whatever it will be, where theoretically one could get hurt and the like. So really, it kind of depends, meaning if it's a high-risk situation where it's very, very likely you'll get hurt, then it's going to be forbidden. If it's an activity in which things might happen, but you're not really putting yourself in a matzav where it's very substantially likely it's going to happen, so then we say it's like everything else. I mean, listen, every time you go into a car, God forbid, there may be an accident. So going in a football field, it's not going to be worse necessarily than going into a car. An interesting question is something like boxing, where the whole sport is to hit the other person. So some people are going to be more machmir in that, and there's especially going to be a problem. Let's say if you're boxing with a parent, because there's a special issue in the Torah to hit your dad, hit your father or your mother, and hitting is defined as causing a black and blue mark or blood. So if you just hit, that wouldn't be the issur, but certainly in boxing it's entirely possible for there to be a black and blue mark, and even in football that might happen. So there actually is more of a halachic shaila of playing those types of roughhousing with your parent, but if it's not your parent, so generally speaking, we consider it to be permitted. Okay, yeah.
I read in the Chofetz Chaim says that he doesn't like the custom of not wearing tallit before you're married. What do we do with that?
Yeah. So as all of you know, obviously, if you daven in an Ashkenaz minyan like here, so the custom among most Ashkenazim, excepting of course the Jews from Germany, the Ashkenazim, the real Ashkenazim, is that one does not wear a tallis Gadol, a big tallis, until you're already married. Sfardim, many Sfardim do, and the Yekis, the German Jews, also do. But the Polish, Lithuanian, etc., Russian Jews do not. And this is based on a drasha that's not even found in Chazal, which is very strange to have a drasha on Psukim, and that is that the reference to tzitzis in Sefer Devarim is right after the mitzvah of marrying ki yikach isha, so we darshan, you don't wear a tallis unless you're married. The Mishnah Berurah, the Chofetz Chaim himself, says that this is questionable, and the Chofetz Chaim was critical of this. And yet, as far as we know, the minhag, Chofetz Chaim was from Poland or Lithuania, kind of rod and switched from one to the other all the time, and the minhag remained the minhag. So there are two different ways of understanding. Actually, the Chofetz Chaim, that passage in the Mishnah Berurah, is not entirely as clear as one would say. Some say the Chofetz Chaim was critical of the minhag, but the minhag was the minhag, and the minhag remained the minhag, and therefore was not going to be changed. Others say that the Maharil, which was the source of what the Chofetz Chaim is quoting, was not referring to a tallis gadol. He was referring to a tallis katan, that there actually was a shita that until you're married, you didn't even wear a tallis katan, and that is what the Mishnah Berurah was critical of. And of course, as we know, today, single people certainly wear a tallis katan. So there are two ways of learning. So some claim that the Maharil is a little ambiguous, and he's not even referring to a tallis gadol. But it is a strange thing. I mean, why shouldn't an unmarried person fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzis in the best way possible? But still, the Maharil had this drasha, number one, which is very difficult because you almost never find Rishonim making their own drasha to learn out a halacha. But the other reason the Maharil gives is that a tallis was a sign of chashivas, a sign of standing, a sign of position in the community. So until a person was married, he didn't necessarily have that particular status. So all I can tell you is that there is a certain power of minhag, and although not about this in particular, but it is recorded that in the Chofetz Chaim's personal life, he would follow the minhagim, even if in the Mishnah Berurah he ruled against it. Meaning, if you didn't have a minhag, follow what the Mishnah Berurah says. But if there's a minhag, you follow the minhag. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, sure.
If is it pashut that one is chiyav to make even if you're not wearing a tallit Gadol by like wrapping yourself in tallit cotton before you put it on? Is that like a pashut or is that kind of optional?
Well, again, it is a machlokas. There are those that say that even if you wear a tallit katan, you do the ituf of wrapping it around your head and making lisatev. The prevailing minhag is that you don't do the ituf and instead you make the bracha al mitzvahs sitches. But again, if you do the other way, you certainly have a makam to be samichan. But this is only if the tallit katan is big enough that it covers most of the height of your body. Yeah.
So I think the last year or so researching the linguistics of Hebrew language, and I learned about how there used to be more of a th sound with the letter ta or sa, and also like the letter vav. This also had a wa sound.
Wa. Mm-hmm.
And I think about it like even down in Iraq and the Yemen, they still have a historical sound for Gedolim, the sound for Gadol or Gadol. So I'm wondering if you think, or if maybe there's other going through the history as you suggest, kind of returning to using those accents.
Yeah. The pronunciation of Hebrew is a major problem. In the Ashkenazi pronunciation, which is not used so much in spoken Hebrew, but it's used in our davening and the like. So there are a lot of sounds that are simply not represented. We do not have a soft G, J. We don't have a J sound in Hebrew. If you have to write George in a ksuva, you have to combine letters Dalid, Zayin, Shin, Dj. Or the modern convention is you put kind of a little mark, but that's not traditional. That's just a modern way of marking it. So we don't have a soft G. We don't have a TH. We don't have a th sound, etc. And moreover, we also don't differentiate between a samach, sa, and a sin. It's kind of crazy. On one hand, there are sounds that are not represented at all. On the other hand, there are sounds that are duplicated by more than one letter. On the other hand, the Sephardic pronunciation has its own problems. They don't really differentiate between the komats, which is aw, and the patach, which is ah. They pronounce both as ah. So how come there are two vowels? What's going to be the difference? So the truth of the matter is Ashkenazic pronunciation is not completely accurate, and Sephardic pronunciation is not completely accurate. Many have posited that if you want to know what Hebrew sounded like in the days of Moshe Rabbeinu, or in the days of HaRav Yitzchak and Yaakov, you would have to go to the Yemenite Hebrew. And in the Yemenite Hebrew, we do have the th and the j, and we also have the wa. On the other hand, some have argued, well, no, a lot of the Yemenite Hebrew is based on Arabic. So it's also not necessarily indigenous Hebrew. It's based on Arabic. So the truth of the matter is, it seems that all the way back, even in biblical times, there were different pronunciations of Hebrew in different regions of Eretz Yisrael. Meaning it's not just a modern European thing. It goes all the way back. But there are some rabbis that maintain that the Yemenite pronunciation is the closest to original Hebrew. And they have encouraged, I'm not going to say it's a lot of rabbis, but there's a small group of rabbis that are actually encouraging switching over to Yemenite, and they say if it's too hard for you, because you already know how to read Hebrew a certain way, at least educate your children in the Yemenite pronunciation. So it is a little bit of a controversy, but it seems that most poskim, most rabbis, take the position that since we don't really know what the authentic Hebrew pronunciation was, and all of these different dialects are composites of the original language, one should just follow their minhag, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will accept whatever it is. Another good example is, how do you pronounce the cholam? The cholam is the O sound. So let's take a word like Torah. I already gave away, right? Do you say Torah? Do you say Torah? That's what a true Litvak would say, Torah. Do you say Torah, which is kind of the yeshivish pronunciation, but that's really Polish? Do you say Torah? A-U, like that's the yucky pronunciation. Torah, 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 Torah. Right? Different Eidos say different ones. So you obviously say, well, which is right and which is wrong? The halachic answer seems to be that once it is adopted by a sizable segment of Klal Yisrael, all the pronunciations now become legitimate. The only question is you need to pick one of them and not mix and match the different features. But the Hebrew pronunciation is indeed a bit of a puzzle, and there are some advocates of the Yemenite tradition as being the closest. Yeah.
Could a plate rental company rent out one set of glass Pyrex or portal plates, assuming they have reliable hashkafa, to ensure they're properly cleaned between customers?
I'm sorry, I don't follow. Can they rent out Pyrex?
So, like, the Ashkenazi custom at home is to not have one set of glass plates. Because
Yeah.
there's a concern that there might be contamination. What
Yes.
if a company with hashkafa had one set of glass plates? If you rent them out for milk and meat for different food with different hashkafas?
Well, in a way, you're asking what they call a counterfactual hypothetical. I can guarantee you that they would never get a hashkafa if they only have one set of plates, because who knows if they're going to kasher them correctly. First of all, there are shitos, there are opinions that say that glass cannot be kashered. Pyrex is cooking glass. Now there's we're mako with drinking glasses because they're used mainly with cold. But when you're talking about Pyrex, we actually poskin it's non-kasherable. It's considered, since it's made from sand, it is treated like earthenware, and earthenware cannot be kashered. Right, stoneware, earthenware. So you just wouldn't be able to do it that way. I don't think. Yeah.
Nowadays, we always have electric lights. When it comes to near Shabbos, is there still an inyan by the candles themselves of oneg Shabbos? Since we're not really getting any benefit from the light of the candles themselves.
Yeah, but this was a question that comes up. There's a rabbinic enactment that we are mechuyev to have lights, not so much candles, light at the meals of Shabbos, and there are different reasons that are given. Some say it's oneg Shabbos, meaning it's pleasurable to be able to eat by light and not eat in darkness. Others say it's kavod Shabbos, which is a little different idea. It's not so much I get pleasure from the light, but rather I honor the Shabbos by special lights in honor of Shabbos. Now, the immediate issue is when you have electricity, I'm just repeating your question, so even without the Shabbos candles, I have perfectly adequate light. It would seem that the rationale of oneg Shabbos is less compelling because I can get the same oneg without the candles. Now, kavod Shabbos might be different because you're still honoring Shabbos with special lighting. So again, the poskim say that lemaisa we do make a bracha. Obviously, we do make a bracha, but they advocate that lechatchila, what you should do is that when you or your wife are lighting Shabbos candles, it would be appropriate to turn off the electricity. So when you're making the bracha on all of the light that you're going to have, both the candles and the electric light. And in that way, you are makayim a bracha on oneg Shabbos as well as kavod Shabbos. Okay? Now, it's interesting how this is going to work exactly, because normally we paskin, a woman is makabelet Shabbos by her lighting the candles. That's why she's not even supposed to blow out the match. She just puts the match down. So if a woman is lighting Shabbos candles and she accepts Shabbos, and let's say she shut off the electric lights, she wouldn't be allowed to turn it on afterwards. So it would have to be her husband or someone who did not accept Shabbos or the like. It is brought down that if a man is lighting Shabbos candles, b'derech klal, he is not makabel Shabbos. This is all right. So if a man is lighting, he would be able to do it. So there is a very, very good reason, exactly for the reason that you're saying, that all the lights should be turned off before you light. However, b'diavad, if you didn't do that, you can still make the bracha lahadlik ner shel Shabbos because of the reason of kavod Shabbos. That's still going to be there. This has some implications in another area. There is a halacha that if a woman or a man for that matter, if they forgot to light Shabbos candles, they just forgot, were out of time. So there's a certain kanas. The Chachamim put a punishment on the person that the rest of their lives they have to light an extra candle because they missed the mitzvah of lighting candles. So there are some opinions that assert that this will not apply today because even if you didn't light Shabbos candles, you're not in darkness, meaning the kanas was not that you didn't do the mitzvah of lighting Shabbos candles. The kanas is you condemned your family to be in darkness on Shabbos. Memela, as long as they're not in darkness, even if it was not through the fulfillment of Ner Shabbos, some would say the kanas does not apply, right? So that would be relevant to that issue as well. Yeah.
This is a question that was sent in. It says, in the Haredi world says that they follow their Gedolim, and the Dati world says they follow their own Gedolim. But these two worlds don't necessarily acknowledge each other's Gedolim. So the question is, who are the Gedolim today, and what qualifies a Gadol? And do both communities have a legitimate Gedolim who connect back to the original Torah?
Yeah, well, that's a bit of a loaded question. I am not going to mention names. I don't want to get into names at all. I will say this. I will say that in my experience, the Dati Leumi world does acknowledge the Haredi Gedolim as Gedolim, although they have their Gedolim. However, I think it is true, and I don't want to get in trouble for this, that a lot of the Haredi world does not acknowledge the Dati Leumi side. Now, whether that's fair, whether that's right, one can debate that, but I'm just reporting, I think, a largely editorial fact. It's just a fact of life. The truth is, from my perspective, both sides do have Gedolim, Gedolei Torah, who are connected to a Messiah, and if they have different shitos, a lot of it is going to be nichlal in the well-known idea of Elu v'Elu divrei Elokim chayim, that these and those are the words of Hashem, meaning even when they're opposite views, they have a legitimacy, they have a makam, they're entitled to respect. Rav Kook, who was a very traditional Gadol b'Torah under every definition, but a lot of his ideology was opposed by many, many Gedolim, but still they regarded him with tremendous respect and even reverence. So it's important. One of the things that's lost today, unfortunately, is that there's often an attitude that if my Rabbeim and my Gedolim don't accept ideas from some other Gadol, that means that Gadol is not a Gadol anymore. And that's a very big mistake. A person can be a very, very great Gadol, even if my Masorah is not to follow those particular shitas. I can still have respect for what the person represented. Rav Yashiv was not a religious Zionist, so to speak, but he had tremendous reverence for Rav Kook. In fact, Rav Kook was his shadchan. Rav Kook was his Masader Kedushin. And when people would say something negative about Rav Kook, many, many years after Rav Kook's death, Rav Yashiv would, and they figured Rav Yashiv wouldn't mind, he probably agrees, Rav Yashiv would kick them out of his house. He said, you can't be in this house if you don't have kavod for a true Gadol b'Torah. So yeah, I think we have to have kavod for all Talmidei Chachamim. Now, what makes a person a Gadol? That's an interesting question. What makes a person a Gadol? I mean, I can give you a list, but the list is going to be fairly obvious. Obviously, the person has to have a tremendous knowledge of Torah. A person has to be a Yarei Shemayim who keeps all the halachas. A person also has to have Avas Yisrael, good midos, and a sense of responsibility for Klal Yisrael. So you could be a big Talmid Chacham and even a great person, but if you're not really involved in what the tzibur needs, that's not your thing. So I don't think we would call such a person a Gadol in the traditional sense. We sometimes use the word Gadol a bit more loosely, but the traditional idea of a Gadol was someone who took achrayus, some sense of achrayus for Klal Yisrael, and that makes a person a Gadol. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I overheard once that Rashi's daughters put on tefillin.
Yeah.
I heard that, and then I also heard afterwards that it would be worse for them to start and then stop than God forbid, a man to not put on tefillin. I think, like, I assume that was because men have an obligation. If they don't do it, it's like so bad. But if a woman chooses to and stops, that's sort of like more disrespectful. Am I right in how I see that? And can you just explain that whole concept?
Let me explain this a little. First of all, as you know, Rashi, the great Rashi, did not have sons. Rashi only had daughters. Rashi's daughters were said to be very, very learned, according to some. If you look at Maseches Nedarim and Nazir, there's a commentary of Rashi, but Rashi is not learned there. We learn the Tosfos, or we learn the Ran, etc. And I hope this is not the reason, but some say, well, those commentaries were written by Rashi's daughters, so we don't learn commentaries written by women. That's an awful thing to say. I mean, they wrote a commentary, but okay. Now, there is a legend that Rashi's daughters wore tefillin, but that is said to be a legend. Historians have said there is no substantiation for that. But let me talk about generally women wearing tefillin, because it's an interesting issue. Women are, of course, not chiyav in tefillin, that's for sure. And the reason they're not chayiv in tefillin is because tefillin is a mitzvah saseh shezman garama. It is a time-bound positive commandment because we do not wear tefillin on Shabbos or Yom Tov. So women are peturas. But that alone would not stop a woman from putting on tefillin, because we paskin, women are allowed to do mitzvah saseh shezman garama. A woman is patur from sukkah, but not only can she sit in the sukkah, she's even encouraged to sit in the sukkah, and she gets reward as one that is eino mitzvah, that's not commanded, and does it. A woman is patur from lulav and esrog, but she can take it. A woman is even patur from shofar on Rosh Hashanah, but she's encouraged to go hear it. Not only are they encouraged to do the mitzvah, but according to Rabbeinu Tam and the Ramah, she can even make the bracha, asher kiddushan of a mitzvah. Sephardim say not. The Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch say that a Sephardic woman can do a mitzvah saseh shezman garama, but does not make a bracha because she cannot say asher kiddushan of mitzvah. So that's a machlokas. But a kol moedim, she can do it. So if the only reason a woman is patur from a mitzvah from tefillin is because it's a mitzvah saseh shezman garama, then logically, if she'd want to do it, she should be able to do it, right? In other words, it should be the same as lulav and sukkah. But here, and indeed, in the Gemara in Maseches Eruvin, it actually says, Michal bas Shaul, Michal, the daughter of Shaul, was David HaMelech's wife, wore tefillin, and it says, V'lo michu bo chachamim. The chachamim did not protest. Although on the side there's a gersa michu bo chachamim, but the original gersa is lo michu bo chachamim. Nonetheless, the Ramah says that not only are women peturais from tefillin, but women should not put on tefillin, and he gives the reason that since tefillin needs a clean body, so if one has difficulty with flatulence or whatever it would be, one does not put on tefillin. So with women, there are various types of secretions and the like. So because of guf naki, a woman should not put on tefillin. Now, within this, there are a number of possibilities in which if a woman is truly righteous and truly careful and truly conscientious, and she does it privately, there may be a makom to allow it, but by and large, the Ramah basically says it should not be done. Now, your question is, let's assume that a woman qualified for the Michal Bat Shaul standard, and she put on tefillin, and then she stops doing it. And actually, I know a person like that, a very, very learned woman. She was raised conservative. So as a conservative woman, she put on tefillin, and then as she got more and more from, right, this is the opposite. When is giving up tefillin a sign that you're getting more religious? And the answer is, if you're a woman. And she gave up wearing tefillin. She said it was very hard for her. But you're saying that since she didn't have to do it in the first place, it's going to be worse than a man giving it up. I don't think that's true. I mean, Lamaisa, she's not mitzvah. So her giving it up is not going to be it's not as bad as a man. who is chayav in tefillin. But still, if you're asking me, Lamaisa, is there a makayim for an individual woman to put on tefillin privately? There may be. It depends on the motivation. It depends on the righteousness. I've said it a number of times that in the reform movement in recent years, there's been a great increase in the number of people putting on tefillin. So on one level, that's good news. The bad news is the increase is almost 100% women. So more and more women in the reform movement are putting on tefillin, but the number of men is not increasing. So this kind of indicates that sometimes these things are more of a political statement than a desire to do mitzvahs. Yeah.
So the concern for a woman is having to do with the Gadol. Men can also experience certain secretions that would render them common.
Yeah. So my answer to that is this. Originally, even men were supposed to wear tefillin the whole day. And this was the view of the Vilna Gaon, and even in the Zilberman school they do it. But for most of us, we stopped wearing it the whole day precisely because our guf might not be nucky, but we got to do a minimum. Meaning, for a woman, the minimum is 0. For a man, the minimum is shachris. So that's kind of the difference. The difference would be that for both men and women, you cut it down to the minimum, but the man has an irreducible minimum and a woman does not. So that would be the difference there.
I'm not familiar with the words of Chazal, but there's a statement in Chazal that anyone who doesn't wear tefillin in all their days, and I don't remember how it ends up, but it's not good. Does that potentially apply to women?
No, it does not. This is simply a reference to a category that is called Poshea or Poshei Yisrael Begufan, those who rebel against God with their body. And the Gemara gives an example, Karkafta Leimanach Tefillin, a head that does not wear tefillin, and many Rishonim are geiros in that. Someone who never wore tefillin. That's a machlokas. Some say, Bichlal, if you're Mavatal tefillin, you're in that category. Others say, you never wore tefillin. But that's Vadai. Since it's talking about a rebellious person, it's only a person that's mitzvah in tefillin. Chabad, as you know, has this tefillin campaign going on for many, many, many years. And the truth is, although in many ways it's all right, well, if you look from, they're not going to stop you, but that's when they ask you, are you Jewish? And they put tefillin on you. Now, in truth, people always look for things to criticize. There are people who criticized the tefillin campaign because they said the following idea, that some of the people who put on tefillin may not even believe in Hashem. They're not putting on tefillin because they believe in God. They're not putting on tefillin because they're mechavein l'mitzvah. And so the question becomes, is there any point in putting tefillin on people who are not ma'aminim? If they're ma'aminim, but they're just not from, then for sure there's a maila. But if they're not ma'aminim, what's the point? So I believe that one of the arguments the Rebbe made was that at least if they put on tefillin once, they're no longer within that particular category. That was one taina that he had. Another taina that he had was that putting on tefillin on a 30-year-old apikoros is no worse than the chinuch of a katan. I mean, before your bar mitzvah, we put on tefillin, even though the kid is not doing a mitzvah, but he's being trained to know how to do a mitzvah when he's ready to do a mitzvah. So that applies to an adult as well. Yeah, you're an apikoros. You're putting on tefillin, it doesn't count right now. But afilu hachi, it's not worse than a chinuch to be able to do the mitzvah Be'ezras Hashem at a later point. And indeed, I don't have the statistics, but Chabad has said, and it makes perfect sense to me, that a number of people have become religious. Of course not everybody, and probably not even a majority, but a number of people have become religious by starting with tefillin. And I myself advise people, when people are kind of off the derech or they're not doing mitzvahs, I often say, okay, don't daven, put on tefillin every day. It takes less than 5 minutes. Say one pasuk, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. You have fulfilled 3 mitzvahs. You have fulfilled tefillin shel yad, tefillin shel rosh. You have fulfilled, according to many opinions, the mitzvah of Kriya Shema D'Oraisa. which is pasuk rishon, and psychologically and spiritually, tefillin is extraordinarily powerful because you're binding your strength, which is your arm, your emotions, which is your heart, and your mind to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's service. So there's no question that there's a tremendous ripple effect that tefillin produces in a minimum of time. So it's actually a very good mitzvah that can bring a person close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, yeah.
If the person's nifter before Mashiach comes, does he already start receiving schar for the things he did? And if so, what would be the mila of Tchias HaMeisim if he's already getting, he's already in Shemaim, already in Gadol?
Yeah, so the question is, somebody dies. I mean, all the people who died before Mashiach came, right? So where are their neshamas right now? Their neshamas right now are in olam haba, which is a spiritual world, and they are getting the infinite delight of the Shekhinah, in which there's no pleasure that can even be described as comparable to it. So the question becomes, what is this thing about resurrection of the dead, Techias HaMeisim, that comes later? What do they need it? Aren't they in the best possible place? So there are two possible terutzim for that. The first is, according to the Ramban, which is not the way the Rambam describes it, the Gan Eden to which neshamas go is not the ultimate reward. It's a beautiful thing, but it's like a holding pattern, meaning the ultimate reward is only Techias HaMeisim, and therefore they're not getting their great reward yet. Now, the Rambam does not seem to learn that way. The Rambam seems to learn olam haba is it. But according to this, the role of Techias HaMeisim is to give the guf a chelek in what the neshama is getting. So therefore, it's simply a question. The neshama may not be better off, but the guf is mishtatef in the ultimate schar. Now, we talked about this. The Rambam is a very unusual shita about Techias HaMeisim. According to most opinions, Techias HaMeisim is eternal. It is forever and ever and ever. Essentially, olam haba closes, meaning once there's Techias HaMeisim, that becomes olam haba. There is no longer a shamayim olam haba, unification of body and soul, and that's forever and ever. Rambam is a very funny view. The Rambam, which is not even taught that much. The Rambam shita is that olam haba is the eternal reward. Techias HaMeisim, they come back to life, and then they'll die again. And they'll go back to olam haba. Now, like that view, you can actually ask the kasha, what's the purpose of that? If Techias HaMeisim is not forever, and it's not the eternal reward, why does it happen? It's a good question. I think the teretz would be that, well, let's go back a step. What's the purpose of Yemos HaMashiach? I mean, a person lives in this world, and a person does mitzvos, does averos. After they die, they go to olam haba, and they get reward. So even without Techias HaMeisim, what do we need Mashiach? Let people live and die, and they'll get reward in olam haba. So the Rambam says the following, big chiddush. The purpose of Yemot HaMashiach is that we should be given the opportunity to live a life free of persecution, so we could be Zaycha to Olam Haba. You hear what the Rambam is saying? Yemos HaMashiach is a type of life which will maximize the mitzvos that we do, so we'll get more Olam Haba. Based on that Havana, I would suggest that the tachlis of Techias HaMeisim is to give that chance to all of the generations that died before Mashiach. Meaning the same way, if you're alive when Mashiach comes, the purpose of Mashiach is you can do more mitzvahs to get olam haba. So Techias HaMeisim will give them the chance to do it. But Ein Achinami, at some point everybody dies. And the only thing, according to the Rambam, that is eternal is olam haba. Now that's a big chiddush. That's not the conventional way Techias HaMeisim is understood. It's not even, the Rambam Shita is not even taught b'derech klal, but that is his Shita. Techias HaMeisim is not the end of the road. Techias HaMeisim is a way station to enable olam haba after a person dies. Yeah.
The Natural Chaim says that the reason that learning Torah is so important is because it's like you're connecting with the essence of Hashem. because Hashem's will and his essence is one. So if that's true, why isn't there an equal emphasis when it comes to men and women when it comes to learning Torah?
Yes, the question is, if limud HaTorah is the primary mechanism by which we connect to Hashem, by connecting to Hashem's seichel, and Hashem's seichel is the same as Hashem's essence, because Hashem is an indivisible unity, and that's why Torah is so important, not only for the practical knowledge, right? The whole Shar Dalit of Nebuch HaChaim is essentially to use corporate terminology, it is the mission statement of the yeshiva world, in which pure learning is the highest thing you can do, even if it's not connected in halacha l'maisa. So the question would be, what sense does it make for women to be excluded? I mean, women are supposed to have a relationship with Hashem, just as men have a relationship to Hashem. So why would women be peturot, right? Women are exempt from the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Of course, women have to learn what is nogeya to their lives, whether it's halacha, whether it's hashkafa, but there's no mitzvah for a woman to learn Torah for 12 hours a day. So why are women peturos? It is an excellent question. Once again, all you can say, and this does not really explain why, is that Hashem configured the feminine soul in a different structure than the masculine soul. The masculine soul was created with a type of nefesh that can only attain its devekus through Talmud Torah, and that's a necessary component of the diet. And if the organism doesn't have that, the neshama shrivels and dies. The feminine soul was quite literally created with a different configuration, which does not require that element in its diet. It connects to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in different ways, perhaps through emunah. And the Gra actually says through tznius. I mean, they say b'shem the Gra, and I did not see this inside in the name of the Gra, so I don't want to say for sure, but they say b'shem the Gra that tznius for women is as important as Talmud Torah is for men. That's an astounding statement, and I think to some degree it's an unbelievable statement, but if the Gra said it, the Gra said it. But all I can say is that Hashem configures spiritual entities having different needs and how they connect to him. And a woman was not made with that particular dietary need. Yeah.
Even like different diet needs, whatever, but it still has a better, they got less opportunities to get.
I'm sorry, I don't hear you.
Even if the diet's different, but why is it fair that they have less opportunities to get as much schar as men?
Why they don't get as much schar as men?
There's much less opportunities.
Well, once again, I mean, like anything else, any mitzvah which you do as an eino mitzvah v'yaisa gets less schar than a mitzvah v'yaisa. So if a woman learns Torah, it's considered to be meritorious and beneficial, but since she's not mitzvah, because it's not essential to her spiritual essence, her schar is going to be less. Just like lulav, just like sukkah, if you're not mitzvah v'yaisa. Remember the Gemara says, Gadol ha-mitzvah v'yaisa, mimi she'ena mitzvah v'yaisa. The Marshal says that is the makor for making a party on a bar mitzvah, because the bar mitzvah boy is going from eino mitzvah to mitzvah, and that's a simcha, because the schar is going to be much greater. By the way, Taisus and Avodah Zarah says an interesting thought. Why is a mitzvah v'yaisa deserving of more reward? I would say the opposite. If I do something I have to do, I don't deserve that much credit. I have to do it. But if I do something I don't have to do, time and a half, overtime, I should get more money, more credit for it. So Tosfos says a fascinating point. Tosfos says, when you do something you don't have to do, you have less of a yetzer hara. Once you have to do something, the yetzer hara is much stronger. That goes back to the idea of women wearing tefillin. Women will wear tefillin, men are not going to wear tefillin because they're mitzvah. And you actually see this because when I do something I don't have to do, I do something extra. So there's a certain egotism, like I'm better than other people. I go beyond. But nebuch, if all I do is, I daven 3 times a day, that's not a big deal. Thousands of people daven 3 times a day. Why do I deserve any credit for it? So the egotism creates a certain Yetzer Hara when all you're doing is what you're supposed to be doing, and we kind of gravitate to going beyond. That's why a chumrah has so much attraction. Sometimes psychologically, we might be more attracted to chumras and less attracted to chiyuvim. The Shagas Aryeh once said, this is a story that they say in the name of many, many Gedolim. He says, the Shagas Aryeh was one of the great Gedolei Ador in the time of the Vilna Gaon. In fact, the Vilna Gaon considered him greater than himself, although that was probably the Gra's modesty. And the Shagas Aryeh, though, couldn't hold the job. He was constantly fired from many, many rabbinical positions because he stood up and he didn't, he didn't show favoritism to the rich or the powerful or whatever it would be. So one time he considered the Beis Knesset had certain minhagim that were written down in a book. And he considered some of those minhagim to be improper. And he refused to follow some of the minhagim. And they fired him because he was disrespectful of the minhagim. So he said, when he was fired, he said, I have a kasha on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a real chaval that HaKadosh Baruch Hu put the Aseres HaDibros in the Torah. If he would have put them in the minhag book, it would have been much more obeyed. Nebuch, it's in the Torah, so we can ignore it. The minhag book, that we cannot ignore. Or some say, a different version, that if it would have been in a Yesh Aimrim in the Pischei Tshuva, one of the commentaries of the Shulchan Aruch, people would look for it and say, gotta do that. As opposed to a pasuk in the Chumash, that already, no, everybody knows. That's no big deal. This is the Yetzer Hara of egotism, and this goes back to Mitzvah v'Yaisa versus Eina Mitzvah v'Yaisa. Yeah.
Is there any inherent violence of growing a beard in pairs? Is there any inherent violence of growing a beard in pairs, which maybe is the more traditional look of a Jew?
You're asking about you're asking about payas? Yeah, so this goes back to minhagim. Now, obviously, there are halachas in the Torah about cutting the sides of the payas down to the skin level with a razor, and that is an isser d'oraisa. You have to have at least the equivalent of 1/4 of an inch or 6 millimeters, etc. Otherwise, you have an isser d'oraisa. But provided you're keeping that halacha, is there a special inyan to have longer payas or payas around? So it depends. Al pi Kabbalah, there is such an inyan in the Zohar and the like. Al pi halacha, that's not the case. And different kehilos have different minhagim. Obviously, Hasidim have a minhag. There are what they call Yerushalmi payas. Right? Yerushalmi payas are very short, very little payas, thin payas, but they wrap them around the top of the ear. And then you have Breslover payas that kind of go down to the ankle, whatever it is. So I other than in Yanim of Kabbalah, I would not say there's any particular chiyav. But the thing is that for some people, it gives them a stronger sense of Yirah Shemayim, meaning for some people, it's ma'orer them in Avodas Hashem. So in that way, it's a good thing because it's a hisayrus and Avodas Hashem. But I wouldn't say that it's intrinsically an important thing to do, as long as you keep the payas lahalacha. Now again, I do want to say there is a halacha of payas, and that's why when you go to a barber or whatever it is, you got to be sure. Okay, in Eretz Yisrael, the barbers have hashkachas too, a lot of them, but you got to be sure that you're getting a kosher haircut. That is indeed a big inyan. If the payas are cut too close, there is indeed a shaila.
The same thing applies to beards.
So beard is a different thing. So beard, the Chazon Ish, who was not insisting on payas, but the Chazon Ish felt that a beard, again, it's not a halacha, but a beard represented the tzura, the image of a religious Jew. And he was very, very strong that even single people, single guys, should try to grow beards. And Reb Chaim Kanevsky, who was the Chazon Ish's nephew, followed that Messiah very much. Now, the truth of the matter is, in the pre-World War II yeshiva world, the great yeshiva world, Slobodka, Mir, Kamenetz, the minhag actually was that single guys did not have beards. It was very, very interesting. What the Chazon Ish held was very desirable, was not the practice of B'nai Torah. If you see pictures of Rav Steinman as a bacher, you see he didn't have a beard. Now, how did they shave? It's interesting. They obviously didn't use razors, and there were no electric shavers in those days anyway. They used depilatories. They used these creams that kind of burn away the hair. And it's not that pleasant because it actually literally burns. So you can actually have burns on your face from the depilatories. And then they would use scissors, which don't cut that close. Right? You can cut the beard with scissors, and then you can remove the rest with the cream. And that's how they shaved. But the Chazon Ish held that a Ben Torah should grow a beard. And the Zayar says, again, Al Pi Kabbalah, that somehow the hairs of the beard are connected to the gates of understanding in Shemayim, and somehow it's like wires, electric wires, that bring Chachma. So again, they tell the Ma'aser of Chaim Kanevsky, he was very, very tough on this, that I don't remember the full story. Either the man was single or he was married, didn't have children. But it wasn't. I think he was married and he didn't have children. And the Messiah in his family was you didn't have beards. They didn't have beards. So he went to Rav Chaim Kanevsky for a bracha to have a child. And Rav Chaim Kanevsky said, very simple, just grow a beard and the Eibishter will bless you with a child. So the person said back, he was arguing, he says, anything but that. I'll do anything. But that I can't do. So Rav Chaim Kanevsky got upset. He said, you grow a beard, you have a child. You don't grow a beard, you won't have a child. So it's almost like a curse. So the guy was like crying and begging. And the family said to Rav Chaim's family, Abba, you're so tough, you're so rough. I mean, have Rachmanis on this man. So Rav Chaim said, what's the Rachmanis? I told him he has a beard, he'll have a child. Doesn't have a beard, doesn't have a child. So I think the Meiser was he didn't grow a beard and didn't have a child. And as Rav Steinman said about this Meiser, he says, if Rav Chaim says something, you better listen to it. Rav Steinman is not saying he agreed with Rav Chaim, but he's just saying it. Once Rav Chaim says it, it's kedai not to ignore it. And this is an important lesson, Don't go to a Gadol, especially someone like Rav Chaim, unless you're prepared to live with the answer. Some people say, I'll go to the Gadol. No, nobody tells you have to ask. If he wouldn't have asked Rav Chaim, okay, he doesn't have a beard. That's his minhag. But once you ask, you got to go with what you're told. Okay, so the first rule of going to a Gadol is you have to be prepared to listen, no matter what the answer is going to be, and then you go to the Gadol, and then you ask your shaila. Yeah.
I'm personally very grateful for my scientific and engineering education because it enables me to precisely profoundly appreciate Hashem's creation. So why then are so-called secular studies not as embraced in certain circles?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. There is no question whatsoever that from secular wisdom, engineering, mathematics, science, physics, even humanities, which is a bit more problematical, but certainly objective sciences, one can develop, number one, a greater understanding of the world. Number two, a greater understanding of certain areas of halacha that are dependent on the technology. And number three, as you understand Hashem's world, you have a greater appreciation for God. So it's not just halacha, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvodo v'yatzmo. So there certainly is a very, very positive thing to be said for secular education, in addition to the fact that it trains you in a parnasa, which is also important. And indeed, the Vilna Gaon writes that for every measure of secular knowledge you don't have, you're missing 10 times that amount of Torah. Meaning it's a 1 to 10 ratio in terms of deficiencies in your understanding of Torah. So, however, the tradition has been from Lithuania, Poland, Russia, the yeshiva movement, so to speak, that the importance of Torah learning was emphasized to such a great degree that it kind of crowded out the other chachmas. Now, whether that's completely a correct approach or not is a matter of debate. In Germany, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch created a movement that was called Torah im derech eretz. You combine Torah with earthly wisdom, and the religious Jews in Germany went to universities, and they did study these things. In Lithuania, Poland, and Russia, it was a Torah only, but even a Torah only philosophy, there were many, many individuals who on their own would study these wisdoms, even though they would not do it in the context of a university. So I would say this is a live debate within Am Yisrael that is still going on to this very day. But there's one point I do want to make about universities, and I made this point a lot of times. I'll say it quickly again. And that is, people often say, oh, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch was in favor of university education, therefore, according to him, it's okay to go to college today. Well, you have to keep in mind that a university in 19th century Germany was very different than a university in the United States of America in the 21st century. In the 19th century, people were dressed with great dignity, behaviors, there was no rampant sex or violence or drugs. So the problem of the university was, well, I don't want my kid to go to university or college because he might read Spinoza or David Hume or the like. You know, it's almost like today, halvai, my kid is going to read Spinoza if he goes to college. The problem of college today is not the books the person is going to read, it's the ideas that they're going to absorb about hedonism and drugs and everything else. So you can't really say that Rav Hirsch endorsing university in the 19th century would apply to university today. Universities today are very, very dangerous for spiritual growth. Besides the anti-Semitism, but putting that aside, they are very dangerous for spiritual growth. Baruch Hashem, a lot of kids do survive, but a lot of kids don't. I mean, I can tell you, I was a rabbi in Maryland for many, many years, and University of Maryland is a very, very big campus. Over 30,000 kids, and a large percentage are Jewish, and they have a good Hillel and a relatively good religious structure. But I can tell you that I know personally Shomer Shabbos kids who were Shomer Shabbos. They're not even Bali Tshuva. They were from birth, and within 1 month of them getting into the dorm at University of Maryland, some of them stopped keeping Shabbos. So the transformation can be very, very dramatic and very, very quick. So you got to be careful about that. Yeah.
So now on the topic of religious healing, if a child is at risk of going off the derech, even after just 1 month of negative influence, is that an indication that there's a broader healing problem that we should be preparing our children?
Yeah, for sure. Because one would assume that if the chinuch had been totally proper in a good way, you wouldn't lose it after 1 month of negative exposure. You are correct. On the other hand, since we never really know how good a job we've done, so some say let's avoid the Pandora's box. But you're 100% correct. Obviously, there are some problems structurally in the system if things like that could happen. Yeah.
Well, Elchanan famously explains that the basis of Jewish belief is where somebody can be clean of all selfish ideas who would see the environment of the world. Firstly, is this the universally accepted belief of the kind of where you should base your belief on? Secondly, this seems to only address the possibility that maybe the world at the United States, which is a big bang or something else. But the belief held by most philosophers is not that way. The world does have a rhyme or reason, even if there is no God. There's a lot of explanation talk to that as well.
Yeah, so what is being referred to is a very famous essay by the great Rav Elchanan Wasserman, one of the great Gedolei Hador, who was killed in the Holocaust. And Rav Elchanan Wasserman writes that he discusses the issue of emunah. Right, there's a mitzvah to believe in God, and if it's a mitzvah, every 13-year-old kid who's bar mitzvah has that obligation. A 12-year-old girl, but how could it be if there are so many philosophers, great people, wise people who don't believe in God or raise doubts about God? How can the Torah be mechayev a 13-year-old kid to a mitzvah called emunah? As Rav Elchanan answers that in reality, I'm just repeating your question, in reality, emunah is not difficult. Hashem created us with an ability to intuit his existence by looking at the structure of the world and the fact that there must be a cause and things cannot happen at random. And The only reason why people sometimes don't perceive it, says Rav Elchanan, is simply because when we have taivas and urges and desires, and they would be thwarted if I believe in Hashem. So memela, my psychological need for my own hedonistic pleasure will blind my judgment and distort my judgment, which in fact should have been clear and straight and obvious. And therefore, the way Rav Schiller used to say it, Rav Meta Schiller, our Rosh Hashiva, Zechron Livracha, is that philosophical problems are actually psychological problems. People come and say they have all sorts of philosophical problems. It's really their psychology that's driving them more than their philosophy. The philosophy is being made up to kind of justify. He says, imagine if Hashem gave a Torah that simply said, you can do whatever you want, whenever you want to do it. He says, somehow people would have much fewer philosophical problems. They wouldn't say, how do I know? They wouldn't say that because, Baruch Hashem, that's exactly the life I want to live. So the question that you're asking is, Rav Elchanan's position that emunah in Hashem is obvious and clear, and even a kid should know it, and it's only our judgments, our taivas rather, that blind us to see the obvious. So you ask, is that a universally held hashkafa? No, as a matter of fact, there are those that indeed say that in the world there is a great deal of intentional hester panim, concealment of the divine. So God created a system in which you have to look for him. It's not going to be so obvious, and it's not going to be so pashut. So all I can tell you is that different balei machshava within Yiddishkeit, again, I'm talking about maminim, I'm not talking about people outside of that, have sometimes taken issue with Rav Elchanan. But on the other hand, if you're asking me a head count or a mainstream view, I would say Rav Elchanan is indeed the mainstream shita that is commonly taught in the yeshiva world. But again, one can, as I say, there are those that say perhaps it is an overstated cheshbon. Now, your second point is that the scientists have seen order even without a God. Yeah. Well, my answer is that, yeah, maybe they'll say that because there are scientists who are atheists. I mean, there are many. I'll mention one. He's not alive anymore. Stephen Hawking. Right? Stephen Hawking was a brilliant scientist who really understood, so to speak, the deep structure of the universe, and he said there was no God. But the truth of the matter is, here I think B'dafka Rav Elchanan makes a lot of sense, because mehechi tesi, meaning to say, why should there be order? Why should there be structure if there's no conscious force that is directing it? In other words, even an atheist scientist is practicing science as if there's a God that he doesn't believe in. Because what are you going to say? It's nature. Well, what's nature? Is nature a consciousness? Then that's God. I mean, you're just saying that's God. I mean, you want to call God nature, that's fine, but there's a conscious intelligence that's directing the whole situation. So I would say on that point, B'dafka Rav Elchanan makes a lot of sense to me. That is, once you posit there is order, organization, coherence, consistency in the way the billions of things work together in the universe, that can only exist if there's a cosmic intelligence directing it. Yeah.
Philosophers had held the belief that you did have actually an explanation of why this world was without a God. For example, the infinity of the world, some believe. There are many beliefs by philosophers that could be order in the world with a cause, just not in the way that we believe God. For example, if we believe, let's say, in the infinity of the world itself is infinite.
Well, the Rambam himself discusses the possibility, which is Aristotelian idea, of eternity of matter. And the Rambam actually says that even if it wouldn't be from the Torah, not that way, he says philosophically that is a defensible position. The Rambam actually says philosophically he is not slugging that up. But once again, I would just argue, again, this is really just taking off on Rav Elchanan, that there is no particular logic of how that mechanism comes about. How can there be order and coherence without direction? Why would it be that something that seemingly just happened would produce predictable, stabilized effects over whatever number of time, whether you call it millions of years or 5786, but whatever. If you're an atheist, you're going with millions and millions of years. Why would those effects be relatively stabilized? Meaning, gravity. I drop the pen, it goes down. And I can do this a million times, and it's going to go down. But why should that be so? Sometimes it should go up, sometimes it go down. Like, why would there be a notion of laws? We say natural laws, laws of physics, laws of the universe. Again, I think that's fair. I know that people say, well, this is the way it is. It doesn't mean there's a God. But without a God, I'm not sure where that idea would come from. All you would have is randomness and chaos, and that would have indeterminate results every single time. So, that would be the argument. But again, now I want to point out that someone like Einstein happened to be Jewish. He was not a religious Jew, but Einstein, precisely because of this, had a very, very deep belief in God as a creator of the universe. Now, he did not believe, this is where Einstein messed up a little bit, he did not believe in a personal God who cares about you and gives you commandments. So he did not believe in revelation. He did not believe in Torah. He believed that human beings evolve morality, and the Torah was an expression of morality. So he was machshiv, the moral structure of the Torah, but he did not believe that God directly gets involved in that. But when it comes to the architecture of the universe, he says for sure there's a God, precisely because of the consistency, the stability, the laws. And that's why, by the way, he did not like quantum mechanics, which actually says things are on the subatomic level are unpredictable. His famous statement, he said it in German, is the old man doesn't play with dice, referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So so for every Stephen Hawking, there is an Albert Einstein, who was actually convinced that there must be a God because of these things. Okay.
You mentioned earlier that chiyav between Ramban and the Ramban.
Yeah.
And Ramban was saying that this is a long-term infinite chiyav.
Yeah.
Does that mean that in the Ramban, where most of your eventual permanent pleasure
is olam haba? Yeah.
Olam haba with the dvekus of the neshama.
Yes.
Ramban would have to hold something different.
That's 100% correct. The Ramban looks at what the Rambam calls olam haba as a holding pattern until Techiyas. In fact, as a matter of vocabulary, even according to Ramban, olam haba is the world after Techiyas HaMesim, the world of Techiyas HaMesim. In other words, according to the Rambam, when you die and your soul goes to Shemayim, the Rambam says that's olam haba, olam haneshamos. According to Ramban, that's not even called olam haba. That's called Gan Eden, or whatever it is. Olam haba is the eternal world following resurrection of the dead. So even the word olam haba is a different definition, and the olam haba of the Rambam, according to the Ramban, is the holding pattern until there's the Techiyas HaMesim. Okay, stop here and take care.
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Samayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.